Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Valerie Hopkins. I'm a correspondent for the New York Times, and it is my tremendous honor to be here with Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Victoria Nuland, who seems to be having problems hearing me. Can you hear me? Are you there? No. Okay, it's all right. We will wait to get things sorted out for a moment. Thanks for your patience, and to all those assembled here. Okay, great, fantastic. So once again, a very warm welcome to Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Victoria Nuland, who I believe can hear me. I was introducing myself. I'm Valerie Hopkins. I am a new correspondent for the New York Times, and it's a big pleasure to be here with you today because one of the major topics of conversation here at this GLOBSEC has been what happened yesterday in Geneva. There's been a lot of speculation, and now we are joined by someone who I believe was actually in the room. Still, it's the third day. A lot of people stayed up late last night reading about the outcome of the summit, so I thought we could start with a bit of a role play. If you would just squint your eyes a little bit and imagine that I'm Volodymyr Zelensky, and I want to know if I should be hopeful or a bit despondent after yesterday's summit. What would you tell me? Is the Biden administration leaving Ukrainians out to dry?
Well, Valerie, first of all, it's great to be here with all of you at GLOBSEC. Congratulations on a great conference, and I'm really happy to be joining you again. President Biden, as he always does, stood by Ukraine, as America has, made clear to President Putin that Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity are something that we are profoundly committed to, and we will continue to support Ukraine as she works to strengthen her own democracy, work on issues of economy, security, prosperity, anti-corruption, and that this is one of the areas where we do have a profound difference with Russia. Interestingly, though, as you heard President Putin say in his press conference, he did raise the Minsk agreements, declared himself still committed to them, and said he would like to see the United States participate more actively in trying to see them implemented again. So we will obviously take a look at that with our Ukrainian partners and friends.
Thank you so much. And what about Mr. Putin himself? Did you witness any willingness by Putin to engage, to change his behavior at all? I mean, I think we came into the summit with fairly low expectations, but have they been exceeded or not?
Well, first of all, I think you heard both presidents say that the summit and the 3 hours of conversation that they had, half of it in 1+1 format, half of it with the rest of us joining, was businesslike, was professional, was constructive. Our president, as he said, had 3 goals: to be, first of all, to meet leader to leader, because he thinks that's the best way to be absolutely clear about where we stand and to have no misunderstandings between us. But he made clear that what we would like is a stable and predictable relationship with Russia, that we are prepared to cooperate where we can, but we will push back on areas where we disagree, including profoundly with regard to issues of human rights and values. And the president was very clear about our concern about the treatment of Mr. Navalny, about his concern about election interference and democratic interference in the United States, about locked up Americans, about the way the Russians treat RFERL, and many other issues, and said very clearly to President Putin that he will continue to speak out on these issues. President Putin heard that. He also heard that when our interests are threatened, we will take strong action. So, the question is, does President Putin want also a predictable and stable relationship with the United States? He says that he does. He did yesterday. He said that he did yesterday. But as President Biden said, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. And we've set out a number of areas where we're going to try to cooperate and we'll see what happens. One is in the area of strategic stability, follow-on discussions about nuclear and conventional weapons of concern. The other is in the area of ransomware and cyber. So these will be early tests, along with whether we can cooperate on things like humanitarian support to Syria, Afghanistan, etc. So we will see. But I will say that it was constructive in the room, and now we have to test how that can convert.
Does that mean you're more than confident that the pudding will at least be edible, if not incredibly tasty?
You know, I think that's very much up to Mr. Putin. We started making a pudding. We'll see if it's edible.
Great. Thank you very much. We only already have 20 minutes left for this conversation, so I want to remind the audience that you can submit your questions via the GLOBSEC app. You can also, if you have a really pressing question, raise your hand and I will come to you. But we are here in Central Europe, and a lot of my Central European colleagues have really made me want to ask you, or really encouraged me to ask you about how some of these themes are reflected here in Central Europe. So you just mentioned President Biden's clear commitment to democratic principles and human rights. According to a recent GLOBSEC poll, authoritarian tendencies or support for the idea of a strong leader have increased in the region to about 42%. You know, in a lot of these Central European countries, we're witnessing the democratic backsliding, eroding media freedom, and as we saw recently in the Hungarian parliament, also increasing hostility to human rights. Do you think that Central Europe is part of the problem or part of the solution? And how will some of these democratic backsliding tendencies interact with the need for unity on issues like China and Russia?
Well, I think we are concerned about democratic backsliding anywhere in the world, but particularly some of what we've seen within NATO and EU space. And I say this with all humility because we've had our own challenges, as you know, and we are working on those things at home as well. But if we as nations truly believe that democracies are the better place to live and thrive than autocracies, then we've got to protect and constantly tend our democratic gardens. And that's true in the United States, it's true in Central Europe, it's true in other parts of Europe. So that means for all of us, we've got to protect human rights, we've got to strengthen rule of law, we've got to allow for free and fair and competitive elections, we've got to support freedom of the press, independent judiciaries, we've got to root out corruption, which kills democracies, we've got to protect civil society. And we've got to ensure that racial injustice, discrimination on the basis of religion or gender or sexual orientation has no place in our societies. And we've all got to work on these things. So we have concerns in a number of countries. We will continue to speak out about them privately and publicly. But really, I think for countries that worked so hard to meet the high NATO standards, they really need to protect those levels of standard at home in their own interest, unless they want to have their countries increasingly look like Russia and China and be those kind of places to live rather than the free democracies we've all aspired to.
Thank you. The recent GLOBSEC poll has some interesting data about that. But I wanted to go to actually a different data point that they have, which is that according to a recent poll from March this year, only 35% of Central European countries see the US as a preferred strategic partner. About 60% prefer Germany. And here in Slovakia, only 17% listed the US as the top preferred strategic partner, with 47% preferring Russia. Is it a priority of the new administration to improve these numbers? What kind of strategy do you have? As a gardener, do you need to sow new seeds or just add more water?
Well, I'm not sure when those polls were taken, but as President Biden said across his first 3 summits of the week at the G7, at NATO, and the US-EU summit, we are back. We are back to working on all of the great challenges before us as nations together with our allies and partners and not trying to go it alone. And that means addressing everything from COVID to economic recovery to fairness and transparency, to ensuring that we, the democracies, set the rules of the road rather than the autocracies. And so we've taken, a number of really significant steps across these 3 summits to protect our health security, the global economy, our democracies, our security, and we've taken them together. And what we want is for the people of our countries to start to see the benefit of that. So, just one example, the G7 nations pledged 1 billion doses of vaccine, of which the US is providing 500 million. And we're not doing that, with any kind of compellence. We're doing that because it's the right thing to do and it's the smart thing to do. We're going to work together in the US and EU context to ensure that if China invests in our economies, it's done in a transparent way and it meets high labor and environmental standards, and that none of us is getting ripped off. So these are the kinds of things we're trying to do together. We agreed on a 15% global corporate tax to ensure that we don't have an economic race to the bottom. We've got a big fund now to compete with China's Belt and Road and help less developed countries. On the NATO side, we're going to work harder on cyber together and all of these things. So, it's been a while since the United States made concrete investments in our alliances and our relationships with Europe. But we are hopeful that this very strong week that we have just had will now convert into a real feeling of unity and greater prosperity and security for all of us. And those numbers are going to shift.
Thank you. We'll check the polls next year at GLOBSEC again. I will actually go to an audience question from my colleague at Politico, Sarah Wheaton. How big a problem is very brazen Russian espionage activity in Europe, and what can be done about it? I noticed she doesn't ask about the US, but let's focus on Europe. What do you think is the solution?
I mean, espionage of any kind is a problem. So what's most important is that we identify it, that we call it out, and that we impose costs as necessary. And I think we've been doing some of that together. We impose costs in the US for SolarWinds. We've seen the EU increasingly take steps, and now we're working on things like cybercrime and ransomware. So this is an area we have to work on together.
Thank you. And in that vein, we have another question from somebody who's mysteriously initialed to WM, who wants to know, what will the US-Russia summit mean to the Sino-Russian relationship, of which the Russian President Putin described as being at its historical peak?
What will the US-Russian summit do for Russian-Chinese relations? I think that's...
What kind of symbolism, I presume, is what Mr. WM meant. Yeah, or how do you think, think this will affect the Sino-Russian relationship?
I think that's a question for Russians. It's their relationship with China. I do think that from our perspective, the president made clear that, Russia should be thinking hard about whether it wants to increase its dependency on China, given China's global aspirations.
Thank you. Yes, we have another question from, we have 2 questions about Belarus. So what was discussed about Belarus yesterday, and what are the next steps the US are taking? I guess maybe we could ask you to elaborate some of the real options, the real policy options that the US administration actually can take regarding Belarus at this point.
Belarus is one of those areas where, in the context of the summit yesterday, the president made clear that we profoundly disagree with Russia. I don't think that either president disputed that we come at Belarus very differently. And President Biden made absolutely clear that what happened with the downing of the aircraft and pulling a dissident off the plane, and then later parading him with clear bruises all over him was just lawless, and that we believe that the only way to respect the rights and choice of the Belarusian people is to have a truly free and fair election, and that clearly Mr. Lukashenko is afraid of doing that. We have already imposed, as has Europe, a number of sanctions, and I think you can watch this space next week for more.
Thank you very much. I wanted to come back, as we mentioned, China. And one day after NATO leaders expressed concern about China as a growing security threat, and 2 days after the G7 pledged to work together against China's non-market economic policies and condemned China over human rights abuses, China flew an unprecedented 28 military planes over Taiwan's airspace in one day. The Pentagon spokesperson, John Supple, doubled down on America's support to Taiwan, but I want to ask you, did the recent escalation catch you and the State Department off guard? How worried should we be about a potential miscalculation that can escalate very quickly into a situation that nobody wants to be in?
Yeah, I mean, China's intimidation of Taiwan has been increasing steadily over the recent period. It's dangerous, it's irresponsible. We've been trying to send both public and private messages about the dangers here and about our firm commitment to Taiwan under the Taiwan Relations Act. So, this happens sometimes when you're paying attention at leader level to one part of the world. Another part of the world takes steps that seek to gain attention, and not always in positive ways. So it was unfortunate and highly unwelcome.
Thank you so much. I'm using all the modern technology with the app, and I just want to do a scan in the room to see if anybody does have a question that they haven't submitted electronically. If not, we see one. We only have 7 minutes, so I'll ask one question from the app, and then I can ask someone to come with a microphone to you. We have one maybe quick question for you here. It's an anonymous question. With President Biden's focus on human rights and the lifting of sanctions on Bensouda, et cetera, are promising signs, will the US finally join the ICC? Is that possibly in the cards?
I don't think so. There are a number of aspects of the ICC that we don't think are produce the best judicial results. As you know, our position on that is well known across both Republican and Democratic administrations.
Thank you so much. Do we have a microphone for this person? Again, please, time is running. We only have 6 minutes. Please introduce yourself.
Hungary, owning the largest independent media in Hungary. Very quickly, Hungarian parliament passed a law 2 days ago, and basically there is a law restricting and banning gay communities and gender equality. It's even stricter than the Russian one. Ursula von der Leyen published her concerns regarding the law, but we haven't heard anything from the US. Do you plan something to do? Because it's an urgent matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Well, thanks for raising this. I think, frankly, in the helter-skelter of yesterday in Geneva, I personally didn't see that this law had passed. As I said earlier in this conversation, discrimination of any kind, and particularly on the basis of sexual orientation, should have no place in a modern democracy. We have not been shy about speaking out about these issues anywhere in the world, including in Poland and Hungary. But thank you for calling attention to the fact that this new law is passed. It takes those countries in the wrong direction, and I'm sure we'll be speaking out from Washington.
Thank you very much. I have another question. So we witnessed actually in the last few days or last week kind of unprecedented use of Magnitsky sanctions on European Union citizens in the case of Bulgaria. I'm just wondering, I know that you have a tough anti-corruption stance. You've now told us to watch the space regarding Belarus, but is this something that we can expect more of and a lot more of under the new administration?
Well, I think if you've paid attention to what President Biden has been saying for more than a decade, including very strongly when he was vice president, He believes that corruption is a democracy killer and that it drains our strength as democracies. And, you know, sometimes governments have difficulty tackling these issues. Either they don't have the law enforcement strength or their judiciaries are also infected, et cetera. And so under the Global Magnitsky statute, which we've now had in the US for 2 or 3 years, we can go after folks who we believe are abusing their positions to rot their countries from the inside and or participate in corrupt practices in and around the United States. And that's what you saw in the Bulgarian context. And interestingly, the Bulgarian government was very welcoming of the action that we took, because some of those actors have been manipulating the situation politically, economically, and corrupting the judicial system for a very, very long time in Bulgaria. So I think you'll continue to see us using global Magnitsky sanctions where they're appropriate, both in the transatlantic space and globally.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question from the audience, if there is one. If not, I will go to Slido. I'll be very curious to see if you have an answer for this. But Radu Karp is asking about the 16 critical US infrastructures which are off limits for interference for cyber attacks. And he's asking if you could possibly develop on this.
Yeah, this was a very important part of the conversation yesterday. As you know, the US has experienced a number of very serious ransomware attacks, Colonial Pipeline, one on our meat industry. And our information is that these originate from Russian territory. So the president's had quite a serious conversation about this yesterday. Our president wants to see President Putin make very clear that this is unacceptable to his own people. He wants to see law enforcement action against Russian citizens who are involved in ransomware in the United States. And they also began a conversation about these 16 areas that the US has identified as critical infrastructure areas and the importance of preventing cyber attacks in these areas. And we've passed that list to the Russian government. It's also available on US government websites. It's everything from what you expect. It's electricity sector, transport sector, food sector, health sector, water, these kinds of things. And civilized nations should not be attacking each other's critical infrastructure with cyber or allowing criminals from their territory to do that. So we're going to initiate and deepen a dialogue with the Russian Federation on these issues and test whether they're willing to join us in preventing this kind of malign activity. And we'll see. As I said, that'll be a key piece of whether this pudding is tasty or not. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for being with us today, and thank you very much to the audience for coming on the third day. Hope to see you again soon in person.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. I would just like to remind the members of the audience that the next